Alright.
Alright, a bunch of you on IRC have been taking a bit of an interest in amateur radio, and Mustang and I, as well as a few others in IRC, are licensed amateur radio operators. Now, we do want to start getting into a bit of amateur radio because it is cool technology, and a lot of us like to just dick around. A lot of us like to dick around with tech and see how far we can push it. So, how did amateur radio start?
Well, amateur radio, I believe it started somewhere around 1920. I don't remember the exact date, but it's been around a lot longer than that. It's just basically people that they didn't do it professionally, they did it for a hobby, they messed around with radio, and through the years, they've pushed the envelope so far, trying all different kinds of things. I mean, you think just radio, you know, just voice communications over a staticky radio, but there's a lot more to it.
A lot of times when people think amateur radio, it's just two fat truck stop CB guys talking about their monkey wrench and all that crap. But there's actually a really big community behind amateur radio. One of the primary reasons to get into amateur radio is to set up emergency communications when the shit has hit the fan, which in recent dates shit has hit the fan. You know, we've had a lot of bad weather. Ophidian does a lot of emergency amateur radio stuff. I'm involved with the amateur radio emergency services myself. Amateur radio was actually designed as a private sector of military emergency communication. So when the military needs aid, if they don't have communications, civilians can step in when an emergency arises and we can do something about it. But the 99% of the time when there's no emergency, you just talk to pretty cool people.
Do some practice, prepare yourself for emergency. That's the thing about amateur radio. The redundancy factor in it, you know, everybody nowadays, they think, oh, what do I need an amateur radio for? I get a cell phone, I get a pager, whatever. Those all depend on a network, whereas the amateur radio can connect to networks, but you also have simplex, where it's just radio to radio. You're not relying on a third person. So if you have a generator, you have batteries, you have over-energetic kids and are crafty with putting together generators, whatever, you can power your radios when nobody else has got electricity, nobody else has got any other form of communication.
Yep. I mean, and you know, not only that, you know, why do you need IRC? Why do you need Instant Messenger? Why do you need your Facebook or your MySpace? You use these as tools to communicate to people that you normally wouldn't see face to face in real life. There are a lot of amateur radio events where people will actually get together in a convention, like we do with BSOD meetups and 2600 meetups and all that other shit. And people will get together and they'll just geek out with amateur radio. Now, if you want to get involved with amateur radio, it's really not difficult. There are no drawbacks to not having your amateur radio license. You can go to qrz.com, we'll put a link in the show notes, possibly on the screen, and you can take practice exams. Now, the practice exams are actual questions. I think it's, what, 100 or 150 questions total, but you'll only get asked...
No, the pools, I think it's around 400, but the question base is, what, 35 now?
Yeah, you'll only, for your entrance exam, a technician class license, you will only be asked 35 of those possible questions. A lot of the questions are bureaucratic crap about what forms you have to fill out, or just scenarios of, like, you know, what frequency is UHF, what frequency is VHF. Take the test, and when you can pass it like 5 times in a row, with at least an 85 percentile or higher, wait a couple of days, and then take it again to see if you pass it. Just memorize all the answers. Now, a lot of times people think, oh, that this is cheating, it's not amateur radio. But to tell you the truth, I have never encountered any of those questions in real life. It's pretty easy. Now, to get your actual license, you're going to have to find a local amateur radio group, which isn't too hard. QRZ.com. Is it .com or .net?
I think it's .com. We'll put a link up on the screen if we fucked it up.
You can actually put in your state, and they'll actually show you all of the active amateur radio groups. A lot of them are very friendly.
You can go to
ARRL, Amateur Radio Relay League, and they'll have a list of local groups in your area. A lot of times they'll meet up like once a month, and they'll have a formal meeting. They'll talk about, you know, whatever that group does. Like my local group, we do field days where we'll go out and we'll borrow each other's equipment. We'll set everything up in like a picnic area, and we'll communicate all around the world because you know, amateur radio equipment can get kind of expensive. Mustang and I have Yaesu FT60s, which are really good first-time handheld amateur radios, but it's $250. That's a lot of money to invest on something that you might not be interested in. So even if you don't have a license, you can go to the amateur radio group, and they can get you started. You can operate under someone else's license as long as they supervise you. So, you know, we've got Ugster behind the camera. He can hop on my radio right now. Fortunately, it's my ass on the line if he decides to be a douche.
Now, my suggestion, like Fox mentioned, the radios cost about $250. They're expensive. My suggestion is, first, see if you like amateur radio. Go get your license. If you have a friend that has a radio, use theirs for a little while. Go to club meetings. You can use their radios or field day events. And if you don't have the opportunity to use someone else's radio, you can jump on Echolink. You can download it on your computer. It kind of kills the redundancy of amateur radio, but it's like VNC pretty much.
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it.
What someone will do is they'll actually hook their radio into their computer, and you can log into their computer, and it's kind of like voice over IP, like Skype or whatever you use, with VNC put together, so you can control their radio over the internet and talk on their radio from over the internet. And that's another thing. We have repeaters. Repeaters are like IRC networks where, you know, some Joe Schmo group, whatever, you know, you just got some equipment left over, you got a spare controller, and we have a repeater. From New York City, I've actually gone as far out as the western side of Pennsylvania, 290 miles. Mustang, how far away are you from me?
I'm about 100 miles away, but on the network that he talks to me on, I can hit people, so I know he can, all the way down almost by Washington, D.C., I believe.
Yeah, we can go down to Maryland, Pennsylvania, parts of New York City, upstate New York, most of Pennsylvania, and these are all linked together with just one repeater network. So repeaters are set up by amateur radio operators for amateur radio operators to just get messages across. There's a lot of protocol and, you know, lingo, just like there is on AIM and IRC and everything else.
Basically, each repeater, you get on, sit there and listen for a while before you jump into the conversation. Because with amateur radio, there really isn't a real strict set of rules. Every area you go to has a different set of rules. The rules are designed by the people that use it. Some areas they're more strict about what topics, like some repeaters, they don't like you talking about politics or anything that's controversial. I've listened in to the local repeater that he's on, and you can talk about anything there, and they do, and it's actually interesting. Whereas down by my house, it's more of a contest of who's got the bigger antenna.
Yeah, they're pretty stuck up down there. But I mean, really, it depends on the area that you're in and what kind of people are around. And the best thing to do is, if you really want to get interested in amateur radio, try to go to a couple of local club meetings, quit being a desocialized dork, get out of your basement, and start socializing with these people, because once you get on the air, everyone's really friendly. And once you have that license, I can tell you right now, before I had my license, everyone shunned me as the newbie, as the beginner, as you know, the noob poning piece of shit. And everyone, well, once I got my amateur radio license, usually it cost me no more than $15.
Yeah, it's $15 to take.
$15.
It's $15 to take your test, pass or fail. But if you go and you take your technician's test, which is the first level test, and you pass it, you get to take your, what's the next one, extra?
General.
A general. You get to take your general test for free, as long as you take it right there, right when you take your technician license, providing that there's a VE there that can give a general exam.
A VE being a volunteer examiner. Meaning the only way to get a license is to find a local amateur radio group that has a volunteer examiner, so you have to go and meet up with these people anyway, so again, be social. It's really not a complicated process, it's really fun. There's a whole bunch of stuff there. There's radio BBS.
Yeah.
Amateur radio operators have actually put repeaters in space in geosync orbit or out of geosync orbit, and it'll come over the crest of the Earth, and you can track them with a directional antenna. And the only way, you know, you can only get on at certain hours of the night. I mean, like the old
internet. We can contact the International Space Station.
I mean, if we had the proper antenna set up, hopefully in a future segment we'll contact the International Space Station, or at least the BBS node, and try to actually spam them with the BSOD URL.
Yeah, that would be pretty cool.
Now there's a new technology called D-Star, where it's no longer analog, it's digital communication, so you can have 128K ISDN data through your actual amateur radio. It's no EVDO cell phone network, but still, it's data. I mean, there's just so much to this, I really don't know where to start with.
They have moon bounce.
Yeah, they also have competitions on how far you can shoot a signal out, like the Wi-Fi shootouts, but with amateur radio.
People reflect their signal off the moon, or they'll actually, which sounds kind of hard to me, they'll reflect the signle off of is it comets or asteroids?
I don't know. I have heard of people actually waiting for full moons, as well as the aurora borealis, the northern lights, and they'll actually get magnetic and solar wind reports to the actual magnetic predictions of the sun itself and how it will affect the ionosphere of the Earth, so they can reflect their radio wave off the ionosphere like a big reflector out to other parts of the world. And it's actually some pretty crazy stuff, and I don't know, what else are we forgetting? I mean, we've got repeaters, we've got radio BBS, which, I mean, it's a typical BBS. You can leave messages, chat, all that stuff, and email. We got D-Star, we've got repeaters, which are like IRC networks.
Amateur TV.
Yeah, there's also amateur TV. I don't know exactly what you could put on amateur TV. We got to look into that, but if you got a cable TV that has a manual tune, channel, I think, 59 to 61, something like that. It actually falls in the exact lines of amateur radio TV. Then you've got slow scan TV, you've got radio TTY, you've got PSK digital communication. Like PSK is a binary way when you can't use voice. Now the reason for having your amateur radio license is so you legally know what frequencies you're allowed to operate in under what power output. And it turns out that under my FCC ID, I can actually operate at a higher 2.4 gigahertz Wi-Fi frequency than most other people can. Typically, out of the box, a home consumer unlicensed can only operate at 3 milliwatt total. I can operate at 1 watt, which is 3 times, a little bit more than 3 times the more powerful. Plus, not to mention, if you're actually involved in amateur radio emergency services, which set up emergency communications when the shit hits the fan, if you're ever in an emergency situation, you're the first person in the loop to know what's going on. We had a blackout a couple of years ago, and I turned on my radio scanner, I tuned into the local amateur radio networks, and I knew that there was a blackout before the blackout knew that there was a blackout. And no one knew what was going on, no one had any communication, we had no phones, we had no cell phones, we had no fax, we had no internet. The only thing that we had were our two-way radios. And to tell you the truth, you know, Mustang just has this little magnet-mounted antenna, you can stick it outside, you plug it into your radio. This thing can go pretty far. Right now, I'm on the Kings County Repeater Association repeater, which I can actually, how far away is that? About 50 miles?
I'd say 50 miles, yeah.
Yeah, 50 miles on low power, I can go out no problem. That repeater will repeat all the way into Brooklyn, Manhattan, Queens, Long Island, tips of New Jersey like we're in now. And you know, if you really like war dialing and you really like war driving, you can also do the same thing with repeater networks. You can go around and look for repeater networks. I mean, there have been times where I was just doing an antenna test, I'll key up the radio, and I'll wind up talking to some guy that I've never met and I'll never hear from again, all the way on the other side of the country, and just had a generally good conversation. But there are some assholes out there.
You're going to run into assholes everywhere. We also forgot to mention IRLP.
The Internet Radio Linking Project.
Yeah.
Because of how easy broadband is to get nowadays, what people will do is they'll hook their repeater network into a broadband connection, so it uses a voice over IP service to bridge the audio over the internet. So there are actual IRLP links from New York into Germany using the internet.
It's pretty much the same thing as Echolink, except Echolink, you're VNCing, pretty much you're connecting to a computer that's local to wherever you're transmitting from. With IRLP, you're actually bridging the whole repeater that you're connecting to. And with both of them, actually, I think with IRLP, I'm not sure. I know with Echolink, you don't have to be at home sitting through your computer. You can actually punch in the DTMF tones on your radio, and you can have the repeater connect you into the Echolink.
Yeah. And then there's also the naughtiness. See, typically these radios are designed so you can modify them to go out of frequency. Now, officially, you're not allowed to do this. Now,
well, you're allowed to modify the radio. You're not allowed to use it.
Unless it's an emergency.
Right.
But if you don't say anything, I won't say anything, so...
I think that's enough said. We don't put evidence on the show.
Yeah, I don't care. I mean, I'll admit it. You know, I use, you know, and a typical FRS radio. The way I see it like this, you know, and a lot of the amateur radio guys that are going to see this are going to get pissed off. You can go fuck yourself. I don't care. Here's my justification.
Welcome to...
Shut up. I've got this little two-way radio. It can broadcast at, what, 10 or 20 times the power of an FRS radio you can go and get Best Buy at Radio Shack or whatever. If the shit hits the fan, Radio Shack, Best Buy, or your local retail electronics store is not going to be selling these $200 radios. They're going to be selling $8 FRS radios. So if we're ever in an emergency, I can go and hit the store, liquidate them of their entire supply of FRS radios and batteries, and I can still use this to communicate to everyone. Those two little radios aren't going to be able to communicate over long distances. I can. So that means I can act as a manual repeater, or I can even set up my radio as a repeater. And repeaters usually have protection, kind of like passwords, which are called PL tones. Certain radios can break those PL tones so you can get into repeaters that you shouldn't be on, like the police, fire, EMS. And as an FCC licensed operator, if you are caught interfering with any kind of emergency traffic or communications, you will be extremely fined, possibly sent to jail. So there is quite a bit of naughtiness you can do with these.
As for FRS, like he was saying, you know, a lot of people are against it, but I go four-wheel driving out in the Pine Barrens. Sometimes I can be like 50 miles from any road. My car breaks down out there. My cell phone has no signal. I'm not going to hit any repeaters locally with a little 5-watt radio. But you got Boy Scouts back in the woods all the time, and they tend to carry FRS or GRMS radios. So if I can bump up the power on my radio in an emergency situation on the FRS bands and get one of the Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whoever the hell's back in the woods, get them to relay a message to get me help back in the woods, then
so be it.
That makes it a legal situation.
Yep, so be it. So, I mean, it's some fun stuff. You can get into some trouble. I mean, you can modify these things to talk to the drive-through operators at your local Wendy's, McDonald's, Burger King, and etc., etc. You can also modify them to talk on things that you shouldn't be talking on, like PA speakers and things of the such. But if you're operating under a license ID, you can get in some trouble for that.
Yeah.
So don't. I mean, these radios do have some mods you can do to them. They do have some hacks. They do have some naughtiness. And there are a couple of people, they're called jammers. They're pretty much just the script kiddies and the flametards that would come on IRC and just spam about nigger hate and, Nazi propaganda, because just pissing people off is what they do. And unfortunately, you don't know where these people are coming from, which is where fox hunting comes in, which is tracking where radio transmissions are coming from.
Believe it or not, if you're transmitting over emergency frequencies like the police, the fire, the ambulance, the radio actually does leave a fingerprint that they can trace. It might take them a little while.
We'll get into that in another segment, though, because fox hunting is also something that they do in field day. They'll go and take a small little transmitter, they'll hide it someplace, and it'll make a little beep every once in a while, and you have to take your equipment with directional antennas and such, and you have to go find them. So that's something else hopefully we'll get into. Hopefully we'll get into radio BBS. I'd really like to contact the International Space Station. We'll most likely do some antenna designs for amateur radio, because we will be finishing up with the Wi-Fi stuff soon. So I mean, I think it's got some pretty cool stuff. There's just so much to cover. I think we should just end it here.
Yeah.
And if anyone has any interest, hit us on the show notes or IRC. Ask us questions. We'll be more than likely around on IRC to answer anything at all.
And if you have any questions we can't cover, there's a phone number. I don't have it right now, but you can contact the
ARRL.
ARRL, yeah, they have I think it's an 800 number that you can contact them and ask them any questions that you can't get covered by local people.
Yeah, we actually have a couple of amateur radio operators in BSOD. We have Ophidian, Dave, someone. I think we got at least 5. And Acemon and Ugster are showing a real big interest in getting their license. Even my girlfriend's getting her license. I mean, having an amateur radio license in itself is a sign of respect when it comes to police, fire, and EMS. So, if you're involved in the amateur radio emergency services and have an Aries card, and you have an amateur radio license, you can probably get away with, getting away from a couple of speeding tickets.
Yeah, I know. I'm a local, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but I'm a local Aries Races member, and we have a nuclear power plant not too far from where I live, and we're pretty much the responders. We've had training in case there's an emergency down there. And unlike most of the other people that can't get back into my town if there's some kind of disaster, I can cross the line. All I have to do is show them my card, and I can get back into town, get my family out of there, help the neighbors, whatever, help evacuate it. So there's some benefits to volunteering to these different services too.
And just like BSOD, BSOD is a community of people that want to help people. Amateur radio is in the same way. You have a community of people that want to make a better impact on the community by setting up emergency communications and just generally having a good time. I mean, on BSOD IRC, we say a lot of really, really messed up stuff to each other, and we can get really zany and really wacky. But whenever someone has a problem or comes in the channel, everyone's always willing to help, because that's just the kind of people we are. Every once in a while, you have a douchebag come in and they start some shit, and we all gang up on them and they kick our ass. So, on my local repeater, we have a frequency jammer, and we're pretty much hunting him down, and we're taking vigilante justice on his ass.
The shoutcast streams that are of amateur radio repeaters, are they legal?
You are allowed to rebroadcast amateur radio over the internet, no problem. You just that's it.
So maybe in the show notes we can post some links to some streams so you can listen in if you're interested and see what it's all about.
You know who we really have to whore out? Amateur Logic.
Yeah, very, very good show.
Those are some great guys. They're all amateur radio operators. They're not as hardcore when it comes to tech with BSOD, but they're way more hardcore with amateur radio than we're going to get on the show. So if you really want to go and check out some of the stuff that amateur radio is all about, Amateur Logic, I'll put a link on the screen, and I'll put some show notes. I've actually done a segment for those guys. They're some pretty cool guys. I'm hoping one of these days I can actually get some equipment to actually talk to them over the air. It'd be quite an honor.
Yeah.
All right, I think we're running out of time, so we're going to just shut up and leave all your questions and comments for the IRC and show notes.